Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Lately I've noticed like on Facebook, Twitter, things like that, there's been a lot of talk about the Hadron Collider. There's been reports obviously that they're going to start experiments with it again, and it always ends up with people talking about how it's going to create a black hole and basically kill us all. Now while I suppose that is a possibility, my main concern is that it could destroy the barrier between all realities and create the big mistake that turns our world into Gamma World. Now, obviously what I'm talking about here is the 2010 version of the Gamma World role-playing game. Before I talk about that, just a little bit of history. Gamma World is actually a pretty old setting. The original version was released in 1978, and it's actually been updated throughout the various editions of D&D. Second edition, I think, the Gamma World rules use the alternity system, which I don't really know a whole lot about. In third edition, before 3.5 came out, Paizo Publishing actually released Omega World as part of their Polyhedron magazine, which was on the back of Dungeon magazines before they discontinued Polyhedron. This came out in September 2002. Obviously, they weren't able to use the term Gamma World because it wasn't a license that a property that they had the license to. So of course they called it Omega World, but it's the same basic idea. It's a post-apocalyptic setting with, mutations, radiation, all kinds of things like that. For 3.5, I think it was around 3.5 time, Swords and Sorcery put out a version of the Gamma World, which I believe used the D20 Modern rules. So that's kind of like a brief history of some of the different versions. I've never actually owned any of them. I did play the Sword and Sorcery version very briefly, and it was a lot of fun, I have to say. But the version that I want to talk about is the one that I own, which is, of course, the 2010 version. So this came out around the same time as the D&D Essentials line, and it's kind of like a lighter version of a role-playing game. It's not as rules intensive as other games out there at the time, and it relies heavily on the 4th edition D&D mechanics. That being said, that's for things like how powers are presented and how they operate. But the character creation is actually quite different. The game uses a lot of randomness to it. It's one of its, I guess, more charming elements, if you will. And you actually roll your backgrounds. And you roll 2 different backgrounds. So you have a primary background and a secondary background. Now the primary background gives you an 18, and it's this relevant stat. So like each background has a statistic that goes with it. So for example, a doppelganger, their main stat is intelligence. So you would roll, if you got that, you would have an 18 intelligence. Your secondary background provides you a 16 in whatever its score is. Now, there's definitely some interesting combinations you can come up with. Like, for example, you could be a radioactive rat swarm, or you could be a felinoid, which I think we have up here. You could be a felinoid. And let's just say you rolled a rat swarm for your secondary. You could basically be a swarm of kittens. So there's a lot of randomness to it. And in general, it's a much more lighthearted system. Like game, it uses humor really well. The basic premise behind the world actually does involve the Hadron Collider. In 2012, an event occurred that basically condensed all possible realities into a single reality. In some universes, little had changed. It was something maybe as simple as, which team won the 2011 World Series. But in other ones, quite a few realities had nuclear war actually occur, and that's where a lot of the radiation comes from, is remnants from the universes or the realities where, the Cold War didn't stay cold and actually ended up in nuclear annihilation. As serious as that sounds, though, like I said, it still has a lot of humor to it, which I can, definitely appreciate. For your remaining stats, because you have your primary at 18, your secondary at 16, you just roll 3d6, and you kind of just go down and you determine your stats, your remaining stats that way. Now, the role-playing game did make heavy use out of cards. It's something that was introduced in 4th edition D&D, although it was always an optional thing, which I never liked and I never bought any of the boosters with. But in this game, there are two different types of cards. There's Alpha Mutations, which are basically what they sound like. They're mutations that grant you extra powers. And then there's Omega Tech cards. Now, Omega Tech is essentially kind of like magic items. In D&D, there's basically equipment cards that you can find, and they have like different actions that you can use with them. They may be like some sort of laser rifle, or or things along those lines. Now, with the mutation cards, you can basically they grant you an extra power that you can use in combat. At first level, you only have one mutation card that you can use the power of in a combat. At 4th level, you can actually use 2 different ones, and at 8th level, you can actually benefit from up to 3 alpha mutation cards in a single combat. Now, the game only goes from levels 1 through 10, so it's not necessarily going to be like a long-lasting campaign that's going to stretch on for years, and that's not really what they were intending. It's supposed to be just sort of like a lighthearted thing that you play in smaller bursts. Now, if you bought the standard set, which I have here, it actually comes with a pre-made non-random deck of 80 cards, and these are the cards here. So there's 40 of the Alpha Mutations and 40 of the Omega Techs. They did release boosters. The starter set, or the base set, did come with a random pack. I never bought any of these. This is the only one that I own, and I actually, when I got it, it was actually opened in the bottom, so I just taped up the bottom there, because I don't really plan on using anything other than the base cards, because they really give you all that you need. One of the problems that I kind of had with the collectible card aspect of it was, basically paying money for extra powers and abilities. The reason I don't like that is it creates a situation where you're going to have some players who may have better access to better abilities because they spent more money. You may be playing with somebody who can't afford to, to spend a bunch of money on, random packs of cards. So I would really, if I ever ran this, I would only be using the 80 cards that came with the base set, because that's really all you need for this game, where your characters only progress from level 1 to 10. It's not like it's going to be a 20-30 level cut type of game where it's going to go on for a very long time. I think 40 of each is definitely enough to get by. Now, there were also a couple of expansions released. So the first one was Famine and Fargo, I should say, sorry, which came out in 2010, and then there was the Legion of Gold, which came out in 2011. Now, each of them introduced some new elements, so they came with a book similar to the one that was in the base set, and mostly what they included were things like new backgrounds that you can have. They all, of course, had like new monsters, and they all have an adventure in them. So each book actually contains an adventure. Now, with the Famine and Fargo, it actually introduced Cryptic Alliance cards. So they're something altogether different from the Alpha Mutations or the Omega Tech. What the Cryptic Alliance cards are is, they're basically factions or organizations that operate in the world. If you belong to one of these factions or groups, you might have one of these cards, which you basically keep face down. You never reveal it until you decide to actually use it in an encounter. So at the start of an encounter, if you want to use one of your cards, you flip it over. Now, what's interesting about them is a lot of them have effects that will benefit the player, but they may have some drawbacks that affect the other players. I don't have any handy as an example, but they did mention in the book. Now, some of them also grant other minor bonuses based off of the other player's actions. So with this particular one, the Cryptic Alliance Brotherhood of Thought, the effect is until the end of the encounter, you gain a +5 bonus to overcharge checks for psi alpha powers. So I guess you can overcharge your mutations, and you basically roll a dice. Whatever you get on the dice dictates what you get for an ability. With this one, you get a +5 bonus, so which is good because you want a higher number generally. Now with this one, whenever an ally overcharges like a psychic alpha power during this encounter, you gain a +1 bonus to attack rolls and all defenses until the end of your next turn. So this one kind of has benefits for, you know, what your players do if they do something similar. Some of them may have drawbacks if it's something that's kind of contrary to the players, but it's an interesting aspect. I'd like to, you know, if I do run a game, I'd probably try to find a way to incorporate these. Now, Legion of Gold didn't actually really add anything new as such, other than the basic, you know, backgrounds, monsters, and it did include a new location, which is like a secret base on the moon. With it, the 10 cards that came with it in the expansion were basically just some more Alpha Mutation and Omega Tech cards, and there were 5 of each, so that's basically what came with them. Now, each of the expansion sets did also come with 2 sheets of Poncho Tokens similar to this for all like the monsters and player character backgrounds that are found in the expansions. So like the orange ones, for example, would be like player characters, and the green ones would basically be your monsters. And they of course included 2 double-sided battle mats that were, you know, miniature size so that you can have the tokens on them. Alright, so basically, in conclusion, I think that, you know, the most recent version of Game World, it looks like a lot of fun. I like the fact that it's lighthearted. It's not afraid to incorporate a little bit of humor into the writing, which, you know, I think a lot of games have been missing lately. A lot of things tend to be like much more serious. So I like the more lighthearted approach to this. You know, it looks like a whole lot of fun. It's not obviously something that's going to be a long-term thing, but if you're looking for a break from like a serious campaign that's been going on for, you know, almost a year now, maybe break out this and run through the adventure, you know, in the first book. Just make a few first-level characters and, you know, have a great time. You know, it's something that, even though it's not going to go on for a long time, I think the randomness and the more like lighthearted aspects can create a lot of situations where there's going to be some funny stories that your players will be able to tell, like how their sentient swarm of kittens, you know, found this really powerful, you know, ancient weapon or something like that. And, you know, there's just a lot of potential, I think, for that kind of fun, which every once in a while you're just going to need. It can still be found pretty easily on Amazon, you know, brand new and at a decent price. The expansions that I got, I actually picked up from the Kohl's website just recently, within the last couple of months. And, you know, I saved nearly 40% off the cover price, so you can still find the stuff brand new for a really decent price, and I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I really like this game. I'd love to get around to playing it sometime. I think this is more a game that needs to be played in person with a live group, just where you're, you know, drawing cards and stuff like that. But in the end, I'm really looking forward to the day where I can finally break this out for a group and just have a blast, have a great time with it. Anyway, I just wanted to talk about something a little bit different from all the D&D stuff. Like I said, there's been a lot of talk, or I've seen a lot of threads about the, you know, the Hadron Collider, and it just seemed like a perfect opportunity to talk about one of the possibilities. You know, in 2012, the Hadron Collider basically destroyed the world as we know it, and created, you know, the Gamma world. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that video. I kind of had, you know, I had fun making it, and, you know, if you played the game, you know, leave some comments below. Let me know how it went, what your experiences with it were. You know, let me know maybe about some of the earlier versions if you have them, because I'd be interested to know a bit more of the history behind it, because right now all I really have is, you know, this version and the magazine version. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, YouTube. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.